Hello everyone and welcome to our video essay. Today we are going to talk about an interesting and important topic for each one of this continent and maybe the entire world. If you're interested in history and the truth, continue watching this video. So, if I ask you about the principal reasons why slavery had existed, what would you answer? You have 10 seconds to answer. So, maybe you are going to say that there are two principal reasons of the slavery. And first of all, maybe you're going to say that it was racism. And the second maybe could be that black people uh, were seen as objects and not as human beings. So, this is a common answer since in our culture and in our historical knowledge, every time was repeated the same speech that says that just black people were enslaved and only they suffered the abuse in that period of time. But what is the truth under this topic? In this video, we are going to try to answer this question based on that there are many arguments that show racism as not the cause of slavery, but also as its biggest consequence. First argument we are going to develop in this video is that slavery was not based on race, but in people's vulnerability. Just think in the Stone Age when everything was dark and the environment conditions were challenging. The population was low. Survive was the principal goal, and to get it, you had to defend yourself with all your intelligence and your physical devices. If you were weak, you would not achieve to keep your life. By the other hand, if you were strong, you could have more control of the situation, and maybe you could use your skills to make the weak people work for you. Human beings are designed to take advantage of the world, and it includes the other human beings. If we think in the Darwin's theory of the natural selection, we could find that it is true that the vulnerability is not possible if you want to keep your life. Just the strongest survive. The weakest die. That's the jungle law. With the evolution and the civilization, the life changed. If you were weak, you had the possibility to survive, but your vulnerability would make you work harder, and maybe not for your own benefit, but also for the benefit of other who is stronger and have more power than you. It means you would be his slave. So, as in the real story of slavery was saying, people were enslaved because they were vulnerable, not because of how they looked like. As a result, slavery was not related to the race or something related to the color of the skin. No, the deepest reason was the strength of the body and the strength of the mind. Vulnerability was the principal reason why slavery had existed.
Slavery didn't depend on the type of skin or people. Other civilizations enslaved people from their own groups. Slavery is not something that was exclusive to North Africans. There were slaves within tribes or nations before. We have an example. In China, during of the era of the slaves, has been described as one of the largest of most comprehensive markets for the exchange of human beings in the world. Slaves were a majority of the population in some cities in the Southeast Asia. Slavery was also common in India, where it has been estimated that there were more slaves than in the interior Western Hemisphere, and were the original those kidnapped children of the purpose of slavery. As say you before, in some cities, for example, in the Southeast Asia and India, the most population were slaves. Slavery was also an established institution in the Western Hemisphere before the Columbus ship even appeared on the horizon. Another example is about the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire regularly enslaved a percentage of the young boys. For example, black rednecks and white liberals from the valleys, converting them to Islam and assigning them to various duties in the civil of military establishment. So, for most of the history of slavery, which cover most of the history of the human race, most slaves were racially different from these who enslaved them. Not only did Europeans enslave other Europeans, African, Asian, and Indian people enslaved or were enslaved and transported from their native lands, bondage, or another continent. They sold them. But we want you to watch an example about this argument. The scene is of the movie Amistad.
Oh, Babaja, belong to the left. Can you bad me? Ow! Sembe. Apa velo?
Well, as we watch in that scene of the movie, the vast majority of those who were enslaved and transported in the transatlantic slave trade were people from Central and Western Africa, who had been sold by other West Africans to Western European slave trades who brought them to Africa. Slaves were captured through the wars. For example, Africans would fight wars with other Africans to enslave them to sell to the white men or European. So slavery was a huge business, a different for different, for example, African kingdom or different nations in the world.
Now, we realize one result of the slavery around the world, time by time, the discrimination. Firstly, what is it when someone makes a distinction for or against a person on the basis of the group or class to which a person belongs? It is a definition, of course, of a dictionary, but it is true. In that sense, slavery was the door that opened many ways to discriminate. For instance, judge by the social status, gender, race, place of origin, and dwelling place. Secondly, as Thomas Sowell said, today it seems obvious, just as Abraham Lincoln says, if slavery is not wrong, nothing is wrong. But the hard fact is that for thousands of years, slavery was simply not an issue, even among the great religious thinkers and moral philosophers of civilization around the world. Clearly, slavery was not a problem. As discrimination apparently isn't today, the life continues without looking, and it is risky, in our opinion. Regardless of the words of Abraham Lincoln mentioned by Sowell previously, it's necessary to put those Lincoln words in context. He said it in a conversation that had with three Kentuckians, one called Governor Thomas, the second Albert Hodges, and the third one Archibald Dixon. And he declared, I am naturally anti-slavery, because he created an Emancipation Proclamation that consists of freedom to slave. But the dilemma is, what the background of that? Well, the country had a necessity of military force, and a good option was them, the slaves. Thirdly, before, race became the most visible difference between slaves and slaves owner in the Western Hemisphere. As a result of it, exists kind of discriminations. Please look this. Well, this is an article, the 20th, of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It shows an ideal, but reality shows us many differences, and those as problems for the society. We do not respect the difference. We hate it. People pretend that everyone should be equal, and we are not. Some difference belong in excuses to discriminate and infringe and damage other human beings. As you see, it is one of the point of view that is the law, but I want to show you the other. According to the data of the Ministry of the Interior in the country, there are 737 investigations for discrimination. 443 investigations are by race or religion. 50% of cases due to discrimination occur in Bogota. 64% of cases of discrimination are still in process in the offices of the Attorney General of the nation. 17% of the cases are directed to the woman and 79% to men and 2% to the Afro and LGBTI population and 12% to groups that include both men and women. For those reasons, slavery permits that one violates other. And now we continue in that line. We make fun someone who is too fat, or if he speaks with his or her accent, or if it is woman or men, or if someone is in a condition of this place. And I continue to mention others, but do not forget, slavery was the door for it.
I hear something saying.
These all previous dates are to take into account that, first of all, black people in North America have not been the only ones who have suffered the pain of a slave life, and in North American white people have not been the only ones who have enslaved human beings. The same happens to Western civilization in general. It has had to carry the weight of slavery crimes as they were its own creation. But actually, slavery has been a cancer which spread out all around the world since it started thousands of years back in human history. On the other hand, we have already seen along the video that there were slavers and slaves among the same races. People from the same cultures, the same territories, with the same appearance. Based on that, we can affirm that slavery has not been a result of the contempt towards a specific origin or race. Instead, racism was a consequence of the gap between the powerful and the vulnerable, the one who has the control and the one who survives only by following orders. In fact, today specifically as Colombian people, we still see the discrimination towards those who are descendants of Africans and indigenous peoples. And besides, the racism does not come only from the elites, but from the popular masses. Maybe civilizations could abolish slavery, but its heritage in terms of the hate against our own people is something that is still so far from disappearing. The instrumental use of the history of slavery today also underlies the claim that slavery grew out of racism. For most of its long history, which includes most of the history of the human race, slavery was largely not the enslavement of racially different people, for the simple reason that only in recent centuries has either the technology or the wealth existed to go to another continent to get slaves and transport them en masse across an ocean. People were enslaved because they were vulnerable, not because of how they looked. The peoples of Balkans were enslaved by fellow Europeans as well as by the peoples of the Middle East for at least 6 centuries before the first African was brought to the Western Hemisphere. To finish this trip, we can even say that American civilization was not the first one to enslave people, but it was the first one to go against that violent, unhuman, but normalized practice. In the very Holy Bible, the examples of slavery abound. Then we'll close with the last quotation from the real history of slavery. While slavery was common to all civilizations, as well as to peoples considered uncivilized, only one civilization developed a moral revulsion against it, very late in its history, Western civilization. Today it seems so obvious that, as Abraham Lincoln said, if slavery is not wrong, nothing is wrong. But the hard fact is that, for thousands of years, slavery was simply not an issue even among the great religious thinkers or moral philosophers of civilizations around the world.